I never expected a simple visit to my best friend's house would leave me caught in the gaze of his mother, a woman whose smile felt like both a warning and an invitation. I hadn't been to my best friend's house in years. College, work, life, all of it had kept me away. So when I finally stood at that familiar doorstep, suitcase in hand, I expected the same creaky old welcome, the faint smell of polish on the wooden railings, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. What I didn't expect was her. The door swung open, and there she was, his mom. She hadn't changed in the way I thought she would. If anything, she seemed to carry herself with even more ease, more quiet confidence, like someone who knew the world wasn't rushing her anymore. Her hair, a soft chestnut with strands of silver catching the sunlight, framed her face in waves that looked effortlessly graceful. She gave me a smile that started polite and turned playful. "You've grown," she said, her voice warm but edged with mischief. "But you're still too young to handle me." I laughed, because what else could I do? The words were light, teasing, but they settled somewhere deeper than I wanted to admit. She tilted her head, as though gauging how I'd react, and for a moment I felt less like the kid who used to raid her kitchen with her son, and more like a man she was studying. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't rushed, or perfunctory, like the greetings we so often exchange out of habit. Her arms slipped naturally around my shoulders, drawing me in. Her cheek brushed against mine, just long enough for me to notice the softness of her skin and the faint floral scent of her perfume. Something subtle, not overpowering, like jasmine after rain. My chest tightened, not with nerves, but with a sudden, sharp awareness of her. When she pulled back, her hand lingered lightly on my arm, giving it a small squeeze before letting go. That tiny gesture should have been nothing, just motherly warmth. But it left me grounded in the strange truth: this wasn't the same woman I'd remembered in passing. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was her own presence, impossible to ignore. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I caught the glint of amusement in her eyes as she watched me shuffle inside, suddenly less sure of myself than I thought I'd be. The house smelled the same: fresh bread, lemon cleaner, a trace of coffee in the air, but it all felt different. Like stepping back into a memory that had quietly rewritten itself. I could still hear my friend upstairs, his music spilling faintly through the floorboards, but it was her voice, her presence at my side, that filled the space. And as she closed the door behind me, I realized something unsettling. This visit was supposed to be about catching up with my best friend. Yet already, before the weekend had even begun, it was his mother who had captured my full attention. Dinner that night was simple, but comforting, the kind of meal that spoke more about care than extravagance. Roasted chicken, fresh salad, warm bread straight from the oven. The table was set neatly, candles flickering in their holders, throwing a soft glow across the room. My friend sat across from me, but it quickly became clear his attention wasn't on the table. His phone buzzed every few minutes, and he answered each notification with the eagerness of someone who would rather be anywhere else. He'd throw in a word here or there, a laugh at his own jokes, but the rhythm of the conversation wasn't between him and me. It was between me and his mother. She asked me about school, about the work I'd been doing lately, about whether I still played guitar like I used to. Every question felt intentional, as if she wasn't just making polite dinner talk but genuinely wanting to know who I'd become. And the way she listened, it was disarming. She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting against the table, her chin balanced in her hand. Every time I spoke, her eyes stayed fixed on mine, warm and unhurried, like there was nowhere else she needed to be. At one point, she laughed at something I said, nothing particularly funny, just a clumsy story about getting lost on the way to a job interview. But her laughter, it filled the room. It was low, rich, carrying that same playful edge I'd heard earlier at the door. And before I could stop myself, I realized I was smiling wider than I should, just from seeing her smile. The moment that unsettled me most, though, came when she passed me a dish. Our fingers brushed, nothing dramatic, just a passing touch, but her hand lingered a second longer than necessary. My skin tingled where her fingertips had grazed mine, and for an instant, it felt like she noticed it too. Her eyes flicked up, met mine, and then she looked away with a casual ease that I couldn't quite match. I caught myself stealing glances at her as the meal went on. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way her smile softened whenever she looked at her son, even if he barely acknowledged her. And the way she sometimes caught me watching her, only to hold my gaze just long enough for me to wonder if I was imagining the electricity between us. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, sitting at a family table, eating a simple dinner, and yet sensing undercurrents strong enough to shift the ground beneath my feet. I told myself it was harmless, just conversation, just kindness. But when she poured me another glass of water, her fingers brushing mine once again, I knew I wasn't the only one aware of how much was unspoken between us. The house had gone still by the time I wandered into the kitchen. My friend had disappeared upstairs hours ago, music still pulsing faintly through his closed door. I wasn't tired yet, though. Restlessness had a hold on me, so I put on some water for tea, letting the kettle hum softly on the stove. That's when I heard her voice. "You always did drink tea late at night." I turned, and there she was, leaning casually against the doorway. She wore a loose sweater now, sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and her hair was slightly undone from earlier. Without the bright light of dinner candles, without her son's presence at the table, she seemed different, softer, quieter, more real. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thought tea might help." She stepped into the room, her bare feet whispering across the tiled floor. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, suddenly aware of how small the kitchen felt with just the two of us. I poured the tea, sliding a cup toward her, and she wrapped her hands around it, holding it close as though savoring the warmth. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was intimate, filled with unspoken things. Finally she sighed, her gaze lowering into the cup. "It's strange," she said softly. "The house feels quieter these days. My son is always busy, always with his own life. I guess sometimes I feel like I'm fading into the background." Her honesty caught me off guard. She wasn't smiling now, wasn't teasing. She was simply being human, open, vulnerable. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "I don't think you could ever fade," I said quietly. She looked up, meeting my eyes. Something flickered there, something unguarded, almost searching. "That's kind of you to say," she murmured. I wanted to tell her more, wanted to say that she carried a presence impossible to ignore, that even in silence she filled the room completely. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, she reached across the counter, her hand brushing against my arm in a small gesture of gratitude. Her fingers rested lightly there, warm against my skin, long enough for me to feel the steady beat of my own pulse rising. "Thank you," she whispered, and her touch lingered a second longer before she pulled it back. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled, the only sound between us. Yet my chest felt full, heavy with everything unspoken. She smiled faintly, almost as though she knew what was running through my mind, and for that brief moment, it felt as if the walls of the kitchen were holding a secret only the two of us could understand. It was late when the storm rolled in, one of those sudden summer rains that start without warning. The first crack of thunder shook the house lightly, and within seconds the downpour was drumming against the roof and windows. I stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the sound and the smell of fresh rain rising from the ground. The rain finally eased, leaving the night washed clean and cool. The porch was still damp beneath our feet, but the air felt lighter, sharper, almost too clear. She leaned against the railing, her sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder, and for a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, weighted with everything that had been building. I stood just a step away, still feeling the phantom trace of her skin against my fingers from earlier. Part of me wanted to close the distance, to reach for her hand, to admit what was racing through my chest. But I hesitated, afraid of breaking whatever fragile thread held us together in that moment. She broke the silence first. Her voice was calm, but quieter than before, almost as if she were talking to herself. You know. She paused, eyes fixed on the wet yard before us. You're too young to handle me. The words were familiar, teasing, like the joke she'd made when I first arrived. But now they carried a different weight. They weren't playful. They were laced with caution, with vulnerability. Like she wanted to push me away and test me all at once. I swallowed, my chest tightening. Maybe, I said carefully. But maybe you're underestimating me. Her head turned then, slowly, and when her eyes met mine, I saw the conflict there. A flicker of longing, quickly masked by restraint. She let out a small breath, a half-smile tugging at her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. You don't know what you'd be getting into, she murmured. Her voice trembled just enough for me to notice. This isn't the kind of thing people would understand easily. The truth of it landed between us like a stone. She was right. People wouldn't understand. Friends, family, society, there would be judgment. She was a mother, a woman with years of life carved into her, while I was only just stepping into mine. But standing there, looking at her, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way she was holding herself, poised, yet guarded, as though afraid to want something she shouldn't. I took a careful step closer, my voice steady but soft. Maybe it's not about what people understand. Maybe it's about what feels right to us. Her eyes flicked down, just for an instant, to my lips. Then back up, quickly, almost guiltily. The movement was so brief I might have imagined it, except for the way my heart pounded in response. She shook her head lightly, as if trying to dismiss the moment, but her smile faltered. And in that falter, I saw it, the truth she was too cautious to say out loud. We stood in silence again, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, yet holding back from a line we both knew existed. And though she tried to cloak it with restraint, her words still echoed inside me. You're too young to handle me. But the question lingered unspoken, did she want me to try? The storm had passed, leaving the house wrapped in that deep, hushed stillness that only comes after rain. My friend had gone to bed hours ago, his door shut tight, his music finally gone quiet. The only sound left was the soft hum of the television downstairs, flickering against the darkened walls. I wandered into the living room, not ready to sleep. She was already there, curled up on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, the light of the screen dancing over her face. She looked up when I entered, her smile small but warm, as though she'd been expecting me. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, her voice soft, careful not to disturb the quiet of the house. I shook my head and sank onto the couch beside her. The cushion dipped, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly narrow. The blanket brushed against my arm, carrying the faint warmth of her body. For a while, we didn't talk. The TV played a movie either of us were really watching. Instead, there was the sound of our breathing, the steady tick of the old clock on the wall, and the weight of everything unspoken pressing around us. At one point, her shoulder grazed mine, just a small shift as she settled more comfortably into the couch. But she didn't move away. The touch lingered, natural yet electric, and I felt my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing, just casual closeness. But then she exhaled, a soft, almost weary sound, and let her head tilt lightly against my shoulder. I froze, not wanting to break the moment. Her hair brushed against my jaw, carrying the faintest trace of her perfume. She fit there so naturally, like she belonged. My heart was pounding, but the stillness of her presence steadied me. Without thinking too hard, I let my hand rest over hers, gently, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Instead, her fingers shifted beneath mine, curling slowly, deliberately, until our hands were entwined. The silence grew heavier, charged, but not uncomfortable. Her thumb traced lightly across my knuckles, a quiet, unspoken confession. I turned my head slightly, enough to see the soft curve of her smile, her eyes half closed as though she'd finally let herself relax. No words passed between us. None were needed. The television flickered on, but the real story was in the closeness of her body against mine, the warmth of her hand in my palm, and the way it felt like we had both finally stopped pretending. That night, we didn't cross any obvious line. But the silence we had been holding on to for so long finally broke, not with words, but with touch. And somehow, that was louder than anything we could have said. Morning light always has a way of softening everything. When I woke, it spilled through the curtains in gentle ribbons, painting the living room in gold. For a moment, I thought I dreamed the night before, that her head resting on my shoulder, her hand clasped in mine, was nothing more than my restless imagination. But then I felt the weight of the blanket still over us, her quiet breathing as she stirred awake. She blinked slowly, stretching just enough for her hand to slip from mine before she sat up. The warmth of her presence lingered, though, like an imprint that refused to fade. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice husky from sleep. She smiled, the kind of smile that held no playfulness this time, only something calm, steady, and knowing. "Morning," I replied, my own voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace between us. The house was quiet. Her son was still asleep upstairs, the creak of the old pipes telling us the shower hadn't been touched yet. It was just us, suspended in a private little world. We moved into the kitchen together, the sunlight following us. She put on a pot of coffee, the familiar scent filling the air, while I sliced bread for toast. It was ordinary, almost domestic, yet every movement carried a weight that hadn't been there before. At the table, we sat across from each other. She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug, and I couldn't help but smile back at her. The silence wasn't heavy now, it was comfortable, grounding. Finally, she set the cup down and reached across the table. Her hand found mine with quiet certainty, her fingers curling gently around mine. She didn't say anything at first, but the gesture alone was enough. It said, "I'm here. I feel this too." I squeezed her hand, and for a moment we simply stayed like that, two people holding on to something fragile but real. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted softly, her thumb brushing over my skin. "But I don't want to pretend last night didn't happen." Her honesty disarmed me, warmed me. I nodded. "Neither do I." She smiled again, softer this time, but her eyes carried that same flicker I'd noticed before, hope, mixed with a quiet fear. Yet sitting there in the morning light, it felt less like something impossible and more like something we could choose, step by step. The sound of footsteps upstairs finally broke the spell, a reminder of the world outside our little moment. But as she withdrew her hand, her eyes lingered on mine, steady and unafraid. And I knew then that whatever this was, whatever we were stepping into, it wasn't a fleeting spark. It was something real. Something worth holding on to, no matter how complicated the world might make it. The air was cooler, filled with that sharp, earthy scent that comes only after a dry day finally gives into the sky. The porch lights spilled a soft circle around me, while the rest of the yard disappeared into shadows. I wasn't alone for long. "Couldn't resist, huh?" Her voice floated behind me, warm and teasing. She stepped onto the porch, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. The rain had caught the ends of her hair, leaving them damp, sticking slightly to her cheeks. I laughed softly. "It's hard not to watch. There's something peaceful about it." She moved to stand beside me, just close enough that our arms nearly brushed. For a while, we simply watched the rain together, the silence comfortable, almost companionable. Then she tilted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, letting a few stray drops hit her skin. When she looked back at me, she was smiling like a secret. "You always were the quiet one," she said gently. "Even when you were younger. Just sitting, watching, listening." I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Maybe I just like noticing things." Her eyes lingered on me, thoughtful. "That's rare," she said softly. "Most people are too busy talking to ever notice." Another clap of thunder rolled, and she laughed lightly, a little shiver running through her. The sound carried warmth, but also something more, an undercurrent that made my chest tighten. A lock of damp hair fell across her cheek as she turned her head. Without thinking, I reached out, brushing it away with my fingertips. The gesture was small, casual on the surface, but when my hand touched her skin, everything shifted. Her cheek was cool from the rain, smooth beneath my touch. For a heartbeat too long, my fingers lingered, tracing the line just before her jaw. She didn't move. Her eyes found mine, and for that suspended moment, the world seemed to hold its breath with us. Then she let out a quiet laugh, gentle, not dismissive, breaking the spell just enough to step back. But the smile on her lips carried something unspoken, something that lingered between us as heavily as the storm outside. And though we stood side by side, watching the rain cascade in silver sheets, my mind wasn't on the storm anymore. It was on the warmth of her skin still clinging to my fingertips, and the unspoken truth that closeness like this could never be brushed off as casual again. 1L